And I just started going like what I call running the roads. Let's go to the museum.
Mm.
Let's go do this. Let's play dates and church events. And it got so much because that was what was all around me. Everybody else was doing it. I would get really sick. So I spent 5 or 6 autumn seasons where I couldn't do anything.
Oh,
It was my
goodness.
doctor that had to say, Jodi, you've got to slow back down. Your body's telling you something.
Hey there, and welcome back to Living the Grace Life podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Sakata, and I am beyond thrilled to introduce you to my friend, Jodi H. Grubbs. She is a recently published author of Live Slowly, A Gentle Invitation to Exhale. She is a slow living coach who's passionate about helping you find your pace. She's also the host of our Island in the City podcast. Jodi is formerly a Bonaire Island girl, now slow living advocate, after having lived the graceless rush of hurry and exhaustion in our hustle culture. Along the way, Jodi has figured out and found a sanctuary and ways to care for her soul by making space for God, for others, for herself. It sounds a lot like grace to me. Jodi and I share a fondness for all things beach. I know you're going to love Jodi and her invitation to a much needed slowdown and rhythms of grace that flow from a slower pace. Jodi, welcome in. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm so glad to be a guest on your podcast. This will be a great conversation.
Yes, I'm looking forward to it. I've been watching you for quite some time. You have such incredible wisdom, not only about slowing down, but about tucking in to those places where God wants to meet with us personally. So let's jump in. First, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to life with Jesus?
So, I was born on an island in the Caribbean, Bonaire. It's near Aruba. My parents were missionaries, and I was a missionary kid there for almost 16 years. So,
Wow.
I lived there, yeah, and met Jesus when I was a little girl on the island with my mom. And so have just been learning and relearning how to trust him in some of these hard seasons of life.
There's been a little bit of life lived in between the pages before you were
Right.
able to get Live Slowly published. And podcasts for speakers and writers, we don't just wake up one day and out pops a book, right?
This one was 6 years in the making.
6 years. Oh my goodness. Tell us a little bit about it. Why Live Slowly and what was the motivation behind this book for you?
Jennifer, I joke that I have slow living in my blood from being an island girl.
I love it.
But yeah, but I kept running across women who would say that they were looking for permission to slow down or to say
Mhm.
no or to not people please or to not just live in this hustle culture. And I realized maybe I could help people. And so one on one, I just started having coffee dates with people, and inevitably it would come up, and I would help walk them through how to say no to something or how to maybe even just ease off of something and slow down without the guilt and just find a sustainable pace for themselves and their families. And so I realized I could start writing about this, and it turned into this book.
What were some of the things that you were hearing again and again as part of the issue, or as you described, the hustle culture, which I thought was such an accurate description for these days?
Yeah, we'd be talking and, like, kids' sports would come up or school events, and it would just be instead of a joy, it would be the sigh, like, "I cannot keep up. I
Yes.
can't even do this." And there might be things that someone was feeling like God was calling them to do, but they couldn't even imagine or dream about it because they had already overcommitted and said yes to so many things that they just felt like, "It must be what I'm supposed to do." An example is for me, I had to talk to my family and say, I can't go to all of the musicals that you like to go to." And so they're like, "Oh, you don't have to." Like, just pick a couple.
They're just so
Like,
gracious.
yeah. And you find yourself people pleasing and just not having any white space on the calendar. And then when other people talk about it, oh, me too. And then after COVID, it became women would say, maybe I don't even know if I want to be living this fast pace. What if it's not who I really am? Do I have to go back to that? No, you don't have to go back to that. So in my book, I talk about you have permission to slow down, but I don't really have to give you permission. That's your divine right.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love that. Say a little more about that. What do you mean our divine right as opposed to needing permission to slow down?
Yeah, in our culture in America, where we're recording this, everyone seems to move so fast. It's a busy lifestyle, but it's not really like that in many places around the world. So, if we want to talk about socially what's accepted, other countries, they do slow down, not just for siesta time, but to linger over meals together or
Mm.
family events go way long into the night instead of just a set schedule. That's one thing is just trying to be a little bit more aware of what are your passions? What are things that bring you joy? Do your kids want more time with mom as opposed to like productivity, maybe?
I love that you brought that up, Jody. I was privileged over 20 years now. At this point, I lived in South Africa for about a year and was able to do some ministry there. And after 365 days living there, I came back to America a very differently paced person. And so much so that my family made comments about it. I'm typically a hurry scurry kind of gal to my detriment, but they noticed how much more slowly I moved, even in conversation. And when I am particularly rushing around or overwhelmed or stressed, I have a phrase that I will try to remind myself I need to go back to Africa time because there was no such thing as dropping off a pair of shoes to return them. There was no quick check at the door. It was a minimum 2 hour, how are you? How's your family?
I'm so glad you shared that story. It seems like when I bring it up, someone will say, "Oh, wait a minute. I went to Italy 10 years ago." And you're right. We
Mm,
3-hour dinners.
mhm. Sometimes we just need a little reminder of what's possible. I want to
Right.
circle back around a little bit too. You had made a comment about how it is our divine right to live a slower pace. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about that? I just love that idea as well.
When I was writing this book, I realized Jesus actually offers us a quieter, slower pace if we
Mm.
model that after him. It's God walked in the garden with Adam and Eve. He walked everywhere in his ministry. People got mad at him because he sometimes was if he would have gotten there a day earlier, right?
Sure,
So
you're right. Mhm.
yeah, and so I feel if we look at the way God created us with community and being present with one another and awakening to the beauty around us, there's so much that we just miss. And so we don't really have to get permission to slow down. It should be part of a way of life because we're allowed to. No one really should dictate to us that, oh no, you have to go fast. That's not
Mhm.
true. It's a myth.
Mhm. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for saying that. And sometimes the person we need to quiet the most is ourselves because
Yeah.
we put that pressure on ourselves. Like you were saying, we can't go to all the musicals, but yet we think that we need to be at every sporting event or every activity to be a good mom. As I read in your book, that you had a bit of a journey to come to this conclusion so confidently and faithfully of the living slow journey. I'm guessing you were not always a master of living slow. Would you mind sharing with us a little bit about your journey? Certainly, you've shared about writing this book, but I'm sure there took a lot of living to get to writing this book as well.
And this isn't something that we just achieve and stay there. The slow
Sure.
living shift, I have to constantly implement some of my own rhythms and remember how important it is in my own life. So, when I was 29, my first husband died. And so that slowed our life down tremendously, as you
Mm,
can imagine. And so 9 months in a hospital and then 2.5 years recovering. So he made a full recovery and then passed away of a complication after that. And so my world came to a standstill at that
oh,
point. And as I
goodness.
just rebuilt my life, a few years later, I remarried and my husband and I have Lily. She's 19. And during that time, I somehow forgot my island roots. I somehow forgot even the times in the hospital and being present with a loved one, and I just started going, like, what I call running the roads. Let's go to the museum.
Mm,
Let's go do this. Let's play dates and church events, and it got so much because that was what was all around me. Everybody else was doing it. It was encouraged, and I would get really sick. So I spent 5 or 6 autumn seasons sick where I couldn't do anything. I'd have bronchitis, strep pneumonia all at once. And
Oh,
it was my
goodness.
doctor that had to say, "Jodi, you've got to slow back down. Your body's telling you something." So
It's interesting, isn't it? How frequently our bodies do speak to us, but we have to move at a pace to be willing to hear what our bodies are telling us and then be able to respond well. I
yeah.
am glad you have moved from where you were to here because we all are benefiting from your discipline of learning to live slowly because I don't think that's a natural inclination for many of us. One of the descriptions that I love in your book, if you don't mind, I'm just gonna quote you while you're here. I'm gonna read a little bit of your book. You talked about the process of sea glass being formed. And just before that, you quoted two other authors, Alan and Jem Fadling, who wrote, "We move at the pace of grace and we grow at the pace of transformation." Oh my. I was literally stopped in my tracks when I read
Yeah.
that. We move at the pace of grace and we grow at the pace of transformation. So, how would you describe the pace of grace? And what in the world does that have to do with slow living?
Yeah, we have to have grace for ourselves. We are gonna mess up. We have to have grace for our circumstances. Slowing down is chosen for us sometimes with really difficult seasons. And then we have to have grace for other people. The pace of grace, really, we see that through Jesus. God gives us so much grace for all of the things. So I just tend to think of it that way. The Fadlings have been great mentors in that whole idea of grace and pace and transformation.
Yeah, I was just talking with someone a little earlier today about grace and the pace of grace and the fact that it is far more challenging, in fact, sometimes impossible to be gracious when we're on the run and we're hurrying. There is no capacity to watch what we say or how we say it. We don't give as much attention to the soul of the person in front of us when we have an agenda or we're on our way to accomplish something. What I hear and what they're saying and what you're saying is that the pace of grace is a much slower one. We can't respond to grace if we're moving too quickly to then be able to receive it, right?
Yes, that's beautifully said. If we had talked earlier, I could have quoted you in my book. Okay. It would go right in line with that line from the Fadlings.
Oh, that's good. Let's talk about sea glass a little bit because I've always been fascinated by it. When I was a young girl, my grandparents had a very teeny tiny little place in Rhode Island at Point Judith, and I was privileged to be able to spend a little bit of time there. And of course, walking along the beach, the most exciting moment was when you can find a piece of genuine sea glass, not the bottle that was just broken a short time ago, but real sea glass. And you talk about that quite a bit as a symbol, maybe in your book, and that whole process of transformation that sea glass goes through. Could you talk a little bit about that and how that helps this slow living process to become part of our more ordinary everyday lives?
Yeah, so we had a local dump on the island where they just would literally dump over the glass. It would hit the rocks and go down into the sand. This was way in the 70s. They don't do this now. Nope,
Or
just
they be
wanted to
fined fairly heavily.
yes. But over time, those broken shards, the greens and the blues and browns, go from smooth pieces with jagged edges to very smooth frosted pieces. But it took years
Mm,
and years of being thrown up against the cliff and the stones and just dragged it out and back again. And the sand that would literally just be buffing it over time, they would run into other rocks and shells and just be
mhm,
tumbled. It had a really long life of being transformed,
mhm.
and our life is like that. We have seasons where we are just drug out in the currents, and then we're thrown back against the cliffs again.
Yes, it's this tangible reminder that slow living isn't a one and done, and neither is grace. It is this process of constantly being formed and reformed and shaped again by life. And you said this a moment ago, the glass rubbing up against each other. And it just made me think about we as humans, we rub up against each other, and sometimes it's not so pretty,
Oh,
right?
oh, excuse me. Oh, that hurt.
Or sometimes if we're not quite ready to express that, we might take ourselves away and
Yes.
then find ourselves wounded and not only cutting more of our own soul, but the souls of those around us.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read this passage because I want our listeners to hear the beauty of the imagery of sea glass as you write. Just like the transformation of a piece of sea glass, slower living is this invitation to reframe our heartache as we take our tossed about lives and repurpose our pace into a more manageable and delightful one. We get to experience the ebb and flow as we accept this wild invitation to slow down, pause, and hold space for ourselves. This, in turn, gives us the opportunity to hold space for another person in their darkness, in their remoting. And Jodi, I can't think of a better definition of grace, the
Mm.
capacity to hold space beyond what someone deserves for the purpose of their growth and ours. It's beautiful.
Thanks. That was a hard one to write, and it's one that I have to say I've had to relive again, and a lot of us will be in the next year reliving that. We have to extend grace and accept grace for most of our lives, Jennifer.
We do. And we got our warning from Jesus when Peter said, "How many times do I have to forgive someone?" And we might think Jesus was responding with a mathematical equation, but when he said 70 times seven, what he's saying is until you can stop keeping track, right? That's
Yeah.
ultimately what it means. But that's the transformative work that happens with sea glass as it continues to smash against the wall and against the other pieces it's surrounded by. It is transformed into this beautiful treasure that a young girl like you or me walks along, picks up, and says, beautiful.
Yes. And I think I've been to a sea glass festival where people will pay to come in and look at this sea glass. Sometimes there's rare pieces, or they might want to buy a piece of jewelry or special art that was made. We are that sea glass in the
Oh,
body of Christ and in the world.
yes. And it's free. You do talk in your book, especially in the last chapter, you talk about a relationship that didn't turn out so well, someone who did not respond to you in the way they should have after the loss of your husband. And you talked a bit about how that became for you a space of grace. Do you mind sharing that? That story is just so beautiful.
Sure, and this story has almost 3 parts. It came out over the years
Just like
as a
sea
second
glass.
half.
Yes.
I had been quite hurt by someone's inaction the day that my husband died, and I didn't know what to take of it, and so I just became more bitter and resentful, and then over the years, God showed me, like, they were hurting too, and so I think sometimes we have a lesson to learn, but more than that, we usually have to unlearn something. And,
Good.
yeah, so for this situation, yeah, I had to just give it to the Lord several times over several different seasons to where he one day just showed me where I was back with this person and they were in essence rejecting me, and Jesus slipped in between us and gave me a hug of comfort. But then I thought it was gonna end and in my I don't know if you wanna call it a vision, but just he turned and hugged that person too, and I thought, "Oh,
Oh,
can't do
man.
that."
Wait,
Right.
rewind. That's not how this story is supposed to be written.
And it was like, no, the Holy Spirit was saying, "Jody, you do want to see that because that shows you who God is. He's
Oh,
not partial to anybody." And story, he knows when you're hurting and someone else is hurting, and you're both sea glass that is still being polished. And so that was a pivotal moment for me to understand I was held by God at that moment. I didn't realize it at the time. I always was, even though I felt alone and felt rejected. And then he also felt the same way about that person. He loved them, and just the trust in who God really is, his character.
Yes, that being held by God, it transforms us and then transforms those around us. That is, thank you for sharing your story. That sounds like a bit of sea glass in the making, right?
Oh, yes, painful before you can see through and see that light
Mhm.
shining through again.
Yeah. Yes, but bless you for your vulnerability and your willingness to hear from the Lord. That requires a soft heart to be able to receive that from Him. Jody, you also in your book you talk about these slow living shifts. You have 18 of them that are essentially practices for moving toward a more gentle, kinder life. And I'm curious, would you mind sharing with us some of those shifts, maybe a couple of your favorites? And then also, which shifts have been more challenging for you? And what practices or what things have you done that have helped you hold on to those shifts even when they were challenging?
Sure. When I was writing this book, I realized some of the things that I did, it was more of a shift to slow living. It wasn't just a hard stop. No one wants to be told, "You gotta stop, you gotta slow down and stop." It's not a stop. It's just this shift. And
Love
so,
that.
yeah, my one of my favorite ones is acceptance. When we go through really hard times or our situations can't change as fast as we want, or slowing down's chosen for us, we can't get through them unless we come to a posture of just acceptance, and it
Mm.
took me a long time to figure that one out. I sometimes would confuse suffering with an opportunity, or maybe a way
Oh.
God was rescuing me. I just couldn't see it, and it's because we don't wanna slow down to see it, we don't wanna sit
Mhm.
with it, it's too painful. But when I finally started realizing, "Oh, this is a place of growth and quiet with God," a lot comes out. A lot of things about this book came out when I ran into seasons like that. I wouldn't have been able to write the book without going through those. And so I realized, oh, Jody, you have to accept this is where you're at in the story. And so
Mm.
that was really freeing for me. So it was important for me to include acceptance as a shift because it's easy to gloss over, but we can't move real far if we don't accept things. Yeah,
Mhm.
we don't have control.
Isn't that the truth? But I think acceptance, that's a bit of what I heard about in that interaction that you had of not being cared for, and having to accept the reality that was different than what you would have liked or had hoped for. And once you were able to accept that, then God has room to work. That's just so powerful.
Yeah, I love that you said that because this acceptance shift is in the beginning of the book and that story is in the end, but it all comes full circle for sure.
I don't know if you have a word for the year, but do you have a word for the year? I'm just curious.
I do. I usually I've had the word shift, I've had the word slow.
Okay, of
I've been doing
course.
this on and off for about 6 years. My word this year is intentional.
That's a perfect word, and that's at the heart of acceptance, right? Acceptance doesn't just happen by accident. It's an intentional choice
Yeah.
as opposed to reacting to something. My word is receive, which I think is very similar, and I don't know that it's very easy. I have to admit,
Doesn't sound easy.
especially when I don't want to receive what I'm being offered. There are times when I'm thinking, thanks, but I think I'll pass on that word for this year. I'm sure
Right.
the same is true with intentional as well. How about the ones that have been challenging to you and maybe some practices that you've used that have helped you persevere?
Yeah, so this one can be a little bit tricky if my publisher's okay with me including it and they loved it. But boundaries in faith settings has been a really hard one for me and most people I talk to. So I knew I couldn't write this book without including it because you can do all the right things to slow down, but if you don't have boundaries to say no, and what I mean, really, a easy example is just a lot of us who have grown up in church or are busy in our churches and faith communities is will volunteer, but we don't always know when to say no, or we don't think we
Mhm,
can say no, or maybe
mhm,
there's this idea that we're all kingdom building and different terms maybe are thrown out. And that one took a lot of years for me to get the courage
mhm,
to say, "I'm exhausted. I can't help out. I know it looks like I should or could, but that's not my reality right now." And just be able to graciously say, "I'm gonna have to pass for right now." And I still love the church and still love her
Mhm.
people, but not in this season. So that's not a really fun shift.
Mhm. Thanks for being honest.
Yes,
We
it's
keep it
the
real
hard
here.
if you're on a bike, it's the hard one, yeah, but it's important because, Jennifer, we can grow bitter if we don't say no, especially when it comes to faith, our faith walk and faith communities that overlap and things like that. So I think in this whole idea of slowing down to be more present to ourselves and to others and to God, we do have to not be burnt out and take precaution in that area and watch out for others, make sure they're not being burnt out either.
That is not the storyline of hustle culture. It's you can do anything and everything, and you should, by the way. And so, what you are saying stands very much against that. But I go back to what you said at the beginning, which is probably one of my greatest takeaways, that we don't need permission to live slowly, or I would add graciously. It's part of our DNA, it's part of who God designed us to be. Another distinction that you make in your book is the difference between soul care and self care. We've heard a lot about self care, and that's very much also part of our culture. But do you mind sharing a little more about the distinction between those two and how that impacts slow living or gracious living?
Yeah, I do believe self-care is important, but I think that I call it her sister soul care is just as important because it's having your left and your right hand. They have to work together. One might be more dominant. You
Mhm,
might do more
mhm.
self-care in your life. But for some of us, if we aren't caring for our souls, meaning slowing down to have that foundation with God and just really listening, like where what do you want me to be doing, God? Who am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to be doing? That affects everything that we do. And so just having a warm bath or going to the spa,
Mm,
that's really not going to change that. It'll help us for 24 hours. And we certainly need that. Our bodies need a lot of rest and care. But when we focus a little bit more on soul care, it's a quieting of our souls, um,
yes.
and asking God, "What are you showing me right now?"
And a big part of what I'm hearing too is self care is what we have the capacity to do or give ourselves, whereas soul care is that pause where we move in God's direction and allow Him to be the one who fills us. You offer something called the reflection guide, and you have a couple of important questions that help move us in a direction of learning how.
Yeah, back in, I believe it was 2015, I sat with a friend and took a piece of paper out and made a quadrant, and we had
That's
different
awesome.
words at that time. I hadn't been introduced to spiritual formation quite yet, but really, it's a reflection guide. It's a quarterly tool that I use in my own life, just in this shift to slower living to figure out what's pulling me in what direction.
Mm,
So,
mhm,
really, it's just 4. So, the top one, it's obligations, what I must do. You
mm,
might have a child you're caring for, those are the years they're at home. You might have an aging parent living with you. That's an obligation that you're not gonna give that up and say, "I'm gonna slow down by giving that up." Then there's life-giving rhythms, those are things I enjoy. And so if you love going for an evening run or you love sitting by the water's edge, you love going to coffee with friends, whatever it is that is just so life-giving to you, it doesn't drain you, then
mm.
that would go in that category. Then there's
Okay.
life trainers. I'm worn out.
I think we know what those are, but not always, right? For what they
Sometimes we do.
are.
And then
Mhm.
the last one is boundaries. I can say no, or something might naturally be coming to an end.
Mm,
And
okay.
so you can push through just a little bit longer because you know it's coming to an end. And maybe that was an obligation that you can't just
Okay.
stop that day. It's really nice to fill this out and see. Sometimes until we write it on a piece of paper, we can't hold it all in our head and we wonder, why am
Sure.
I so tired? Why don't I have energy to do the things I
Mm,
even love? Or why do I feel bitter with obligations when those were important to me? And I said, yeah, since if you don't see a lot of white space on your calendar, you might want to get this reflection guide out and fill it out.
It's
It's so
great. I spent a lot of time filling some of it out, and I found it to be very eye-opening for things that I simply had overlooked and not put together. But it required that I slow down and take the time to do the reflecting. As we move toward closing our conversation, you have given some practical, helpful, ordinary, everyday, sustainable rhythms that have helped you embrace a slower, more gentle life. What have been those rhythms? And if I am a mama with young kids, teen kids, old kids, I'm an empty nester with kids running out, and I am just running what did you call it? Running the roads, and
right.
I'm exhausted and I'm tired and I don't know where to begin. What are some rhythms that might help me slow down?
Yeah, these have been really special for me. I know that we are all familiar with prayer, worship, music, things like that, but spiritual direction has been really important for me in the last couple of years. And I meet with my spiritual director almost once a month. And it's just a practice of noticing what God is inviting you to. So
Okay.
that's a really good one to Google if you haven't heard of it before and look into that a little bit.
Hmm.
It's really someone coming alongside of you and asking God to direct you
Hmm.
as you see the invitation. What is God inviting you to? Another one is breath prayer. It's a practice for when you're anxious. There's a
Hmm.
lot of breath prayers, even on Pinterest and Instagram, so you can find them really easily. But a breath prayer is a powerful tool to manage anxiety with an ancient Christian practice rooted in
Hmm.
scripture. So we already know that slowing down and slower breathing is good for you. But when you breathe in part of a verse and then exhale and you breathe out part of a verse, but in your head, you don't have to talk at
Okay.
the
Mhm.
same that's called a breath prayer. So,
I love
sometimes
it.
you're praying and other times you might be reciting scripture.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Do you have a particular breath prayer that works for you?
So I might just say, "Shepherd of the sea," and then exhale and say, "I know you are with me," or, "I know that you keep your eyes on me."
Oh,
Yeah.
love that.
Yes.
Mhm.
And then another one is a little bit different than maybe Bible study time or Sunday school class, group activities. If you're not even in a church right now, it's just called spiritual friendship. It's a practice of gathering in person. That could be as simple as going for a walk with your neighbor. It could be meeting with another believer over coffee. And, you talk about what God is doing in your life. And
Mhm.
so for me, that's been really important over these last 20 years through all the seasons of having a little toddler all the way to high school. Yeah.
I love that mix, Jody, because there's the professional element. So, a spiritual director who's specifically trained to help come alongside and help listen in for what God's up to. And then there's meeting at the coffee shop intentionally. There's your word, right?
Yes.
Intentionally to receive, there's my word, to receive connection and conversation with another person who is along the way. I think some of those will be really helpful for some of our listeners. As we wrap up here, I have one question that I'd like to ask my friends who have come to join us here. I am a firm believer that grace grows in the slow, and I'm also a believer that grace grows in the giggles. So, Jody, what is making you laugh these days? What gives you a good little giggle?
Oh, goodness. So we have two cats. Yes, sometimes I have this beautiful wool rug that I bought like 82% off. Yeah, it's great. And they use that as sort of their boxing ring. And so they just crack us up all the time. And then when they're sleeping, sometimes we find different cat videos on Instagram.
Oh my gosh, that's hilarious. I have to say, scrolling Instagram for cat and dog videos, it's enough to make you laugh. It'll loosen you up and create space for a little more grace and slow living to grow. I love
Ordinary, but Yeah,
Oh my goodness. I love it. I have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And I know that this is going to be a conversation I'll come back to a lot, particularly as I try not to be running the roads in that image of sea glass being constantly shaped and formed, even in the outside pressure of the hardness, really, of life. Would you be willing to close us with the benediction you've written at the end of your book?
I'd be happy to. As your day ebbs and flows, may you rest in the fact that your life is not an assembly line. While the world around you grinds and screeches, may you linger in the smooth, quieter rhythms that give you life. As you hold and ponder your own difficult and joyful obligations, may you give yourself time and space to process it all. As you look within, as you look around, as you look up, may a slower, more deliberate pace cause you to be kinder and more fully present to yourself and others.
Man, thank you so much, Jody, for joining us today. It's been my absolute privilege and pleasure to have conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This has been such a fun conversation.
Thanks for joining our conversation today at Living the Grace Life podcast. If this episode has encouraged you, be sure and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And if you'd be so kind, would you please leave your review so other listeners would be equipped to live the grace life too? As always, you can find me at jennifersakata.com or on Instagram or Facebook. I'd love to connect with you there. Until next time, live the grace life generously, friend. Grace for you, grace for them.